Greetings and welcome to the Halloween edition of the Sliders Review. And I'm here today to talk to you about Terror Train, the 1980 slasher movie. So this is my very first time watching this movie, and I actually watched it back in June. That's when I'm recording this, and so I'm uploading it now. And I've never even heard of this movie, like never. So I was on like Tubi, and I'm like, okay, let's see what they got for like the month of June and everything, right? So I'm scrolling, and I see something say Terror Train, and I'm all like, wait a minute, is that Jamie Lee Curtis? I'm all like, hold up, now she is the scream queen of like the 80s and a little bit of the 70s, and so I'm all like, okay, this must be a slasher movie. It must be one of her famous slasher movies. And I'm all like, okay, I gotta watch that, you know what I'm saying? Because I've been trying to get into more of like the older slasher movies, and especially the ones that she's in, you know? And so I added to my list, and it had a recommendation. I'm like, wait, what is this at the bottom? I'm all like, Terror Train and Terror Train 2, a Tubi original movie. I'm like, what? And so I'm all like, just because it has the word Tubi original doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna be bad. Because of the simple fact, there's a show I review on here called Borders, and Borders is a British show, and it's made over in Britain, and it's placed on television over there, but over in America, Tubi picked it up, so they labeled it as a Tubi original. So it's not necessarily an original. Plus, I've seen like two Tubi, well, actually, I saw 2.5 Tubi original movies, which were just okay. They weren't great, but they was just okay. Now, there was another one I've never talked about called Stepdaughter. I couldn't even finish that. 30 minutes in, I had to bounce. The premise was great. Okay, the premise was great. But the actual execution, the direction, and all of the acting was bad. If they just would have reworked that movie and got like a different cast, it would have been awesome. But then they made a second one, and they both came out in the same year. I'm like, okay, that's kind of odd. Then with this movie, both came out in the same year. One came out in October and the other one in December. So they literally filmed that back to back. And I don't know why Tubi does that for, but they do. And I'll talk a little bit more about them a little bit later. And also I will review both of them later on this month. Because in all honesty, the remake that came out in 2022, it's actually not that bad. It's just a beat by beat of the original movie with some slight things changed here and there. But it's literally, like, I'm not even joking, it is beat by beat of the original movie. The second one is like a watered down TV version of a movie. And it's almost kind of just the same as the other Terror Train movies and stuff. So I don't get that. But yeah, the 1980 movie stars that of Jamie Lee Curtis and everything. So I was really fascinated, wanting to watch this and everything, because I'm like I said before, the huge craze of like slasher movies happened in the 80s and everything. It started with Halloween that came out towards the late 70s, and then of course that what kicked off the big craze of the slasher revival in like the 80s and stuff. They really wasn't really done that much because they were doing other kind of horror stuff, but it just jump started a bunch of like copycat movies. And this movie is no different. In fact, that was like, one of the reasons why they made this movie is because of Halloween. And how ironic they happened to get the lead actress from Halloween to be in here and everything. And so after researching this movie, I found out a lot of interesting stuff. Not too much interesting. It's mostly negative stuff, how people used to treat folks back in the 1970s and stuff. But I am glad I watched this first before I watched the remake, because so I can get a little bit more of an understanding and stuff. Now, this movie technically flopped at the box office back in the day. It had a budget of 2.7 million, but only made $8 million. And so it was considered like, a financial flop, but over the decades, it has now become a cult classic. Is this the greatest slasher movie of all time? No. Is it entertaining to a degree? Yes. I kind of get why a lot of people wasn't into this movie. It kind of just lags and everything. Like it's a lot of dialogue. It's very dialogue heavy and everything. People just interacting with each other on a train. And it just happened to be a slasher on this train. And that's a really interesting premise. It's kind of like, how the heck are you going to get away with that? With so many train carts, it's like somebody's gonna see something, but they're all partying and they're all drinking. So you can kind of get away with that just a little bit and stuff. And so as I'm watching this movie, while it's not boring, it just kind of feels boring and everything because it takes a while for like, in between like the kills. A major problem I have with this is a lot of the kills are done off screen. It's just kind of like, you go into a room and, oh, hey, there's a person sitting down with a knife sticking out of them or a sword sticking out of them. And that's how a lot of the kills really are. You only see really one person getting killed in the beginning. The dude in like the lizard costume, when he gets his head smashed on like the glass mirror, but you don't see him get stabbed after that because when you go in the room later on, it's a bloodbath in there. So it's like, where was all this great stabbing for your slasher movie at? It's almost like, the censors were really on their butts and everything. And so it was really a letdown because of that. Because the pacing is very, very slow in terms of the killer going from one person to like another and killing them. And because you don't see nobody getting stabbed, that's something very irritating. And so, like, you don't know really. So, this is the thing. When you watch this movie in the beginning, you know straight up from the beginning who is the killer. It's literally a revenge plot. Because you see this dude completely get made fun of, and so going through this movie, I knew that older movies all about like revenge and and like for some reason women just like pop out their boobs for like no reason or get completely butt naked for like completely no reason, and they always giggle when sometimes they do it, or they have like a weird look on their face, kind of like a boppy kind of look on their face, and they do it, and of course that's here. Of course, there are the sexual, like girl outfits that they wear and stuff like that. Jamie Lee Curtis, thank you, Scream. Randy from that talking about Jamie Lee Curtis doesn't show her boobs until she go legit. That's why she always outsmarts the killer because she's like the virgin and everything. So I totally get now what the heck he's talking about. She completely outsmarts the villain in this movie. But there are the obligatory like boob scenes and everything where her outfit kind of gets ripped open and everything's flying around, but you don't see her under like boobage and everything because it's completely taped up and everything. So I totally get what Randy is talking about now and everything. But when you get towards like the very end, but here's the thing, when I say who the killer is going to be because of what happened in the beginning, they set it up in a way that really makes you stop and think that, hey, this person from the beginning of the movie might not be the killer. And especially when you see somebody with fingernail polish on them. And so like, and then that started making me think, what the heck is going on? It clearly has to be this dude, but we don't see this dude all throughout the movie. And what's up with the fingernail polish? Then I stopped and I thought about something that has to do with the LGBT and why they were so angry with a lot of like older slasher movies, because a lot of slashers tend to be like cross dressers for some reason. And I remember reading about that, and so I'm thinking, okay, maybe That's what's going on. But I'm all like, well, who the heck could be, who could he be cross dressed as? And so I started looking at this one person, like, something is off with this one person. I'll get that a little bit later. And so, like, once the movie got into the third act and that big chase scene and the screaming and like the running, oh, it got a million times better. I'm like, yes, give me that. That's what you should have been giving me all throughout this movie. Because it's a very somber movie, you know what I'm saying? But once like that third act starts, oh, everything is juicy after all that. Like there's so much chasing and trying to stab somebody and smacking them around and hiding in like a cage and like, you know, and stuff like that is the stuff you go for when you want to slash a movie. And because this is the 80s, they of course have like, you know, they film on like film. You see the grain. I love that in older movies, especially slashers. They do the tropes that a lot of movies try to replicate today, which is, you know, take the camera and slowly walk someplace, anticipating where the killer might be. I love that. That I don't care how cheesy or how tropish it is. I will take that any time of the day because in the remake, they kind of just move in a normal pace, and I hate that. But because you know that builds up your anticipation of fear. 'Cause like, oh no, where's this person at? Like, you know, because like when Doc was like, you know, looking for like the killer, I'm like, where is the killer? Could he be like on the ceiling or something like that? Nah, he's underneath. But then that's when the fingernail polish come to play. I'm like, whoa, what the heck is going on? And stuff, you know. And so um. So, in my opinion, the third act, it really saved this movie. Another thing that saved this movie was like the magic act. I was not expecting to see that. But, like, yeah, I think this is like a pretty cool movie. It's just simple, it's basic, it's way too dialogue heavy, which is something a lot of those older 80 movies used to be. And like because they're like the kills happen off screen, it's just kind of blah and lackluster in that regards, you know. But I really feel like that third act chasing really saved like this movie and stuff. And of course, Jamie Lee Curtis is great at screaming and stuff. So, you know, but so like the movie was directed by Roger Spooty Woody. Well, that's a weird name. And this was his first movie. He's done a lot since. I think he did one of those James Bond movies, the one with Michelle Yeoh and Pierce Brosnan and stuff. And so, like, he actually did something on set that was just so low down. Like, the killer in this movie, like, the person wasn't even an actor. Well, actually, no, I'll get into that part a little bit later and I'll get into, like, the killer and stuff. But what he did to that man was low down. Like, if you would do that today, you would be fired from a movie set. You might get canceled. You might get sued. Like, you don't harass people and call them slurs just to get a reaction out of them. Now, granted, that was a real reaction he got from him, but still, he didn't have to go there. Like, you help your star out, especially if they're not an actor, but you don't do that, you know what I'm saying? Because you can get hit. The movie was written by Thomas Drake. Now, the movie, like I said before, you know, it stars that of Jamie Lee Curtis and everything. The movie also has like a bunch of like stars in here. One dude, I had no idea who he was. Like when I saw him in this one movie, I had no idea he was. I'm like looking at this guy. I'm like, okay, this looks like a younger 20-something-year-old version of this one killer from Urban Legends Final Cut. I'm all like, why? Why does it look like him for and everything? And I'm just kind of like, you know, I don't get it. Like, I really don't get it. And so, like, I think his name is Hart Butchner. I had no idea this was like him, you know what I'm saying? Because like I didn't know he did like slasher movie back in the day. Also, Ben Johnson is in this movie. Now, he's somebody I've never heard of, and he's like very famous in Texas. There's a statue of him in Texas. He's a former rodeo guy and stunt dude, but then later started acting in movies and stuff, and he plays Carney, the conductor. And there's a bunch of other famous people in here, but I could really care less. um, let's see. I don't care. But like one thing this movie was praised for back in the day was that it had like diversity in it. You know, that's kind of strange. This movie was back in the 1980s and they had a lot of inclusion. Of course, if somebody was to watch this today and they was to see like, a woman in a wheelchair, a cross-dressing man, three black people in the movie and everything. Oh, they might say this is woke and everything. Which, if you watch the reboot, yeah, the reboot is very, very, very diverse and everything. But you can't gripe about that because you have to gripe about this. However, even though there are three, well, technically there's more than three black people. It's just when looking for a picture, I found another. But like there are three black people in this. One is Vanity. She, I think, was like a singer or model. May she rest in peace. Oh, may also Ben Johnson rest in peace as well. There was another man in this movie. I can't remember his name. But he was like a black dude in the lizard outfit. And so, like, but of course, he's the second person to die because that's the trope in like slasher movies back then. The black person has to be one of the first people to die and everything. But then of course there is like, the dude who played like the killer, who wasn't even an actor at that time. Derek McKinnon, he played the killer. And the dude was never like an actor. He was literally just like a drag queen, like off the streets, he said. So he had like no acting ability like whatsoever and stuff. And I'm trying to think now. Anthony Sherwood, I think that's the name of the black dude who was in the movie who dies like second and stuff. And it's just interesting how this movie had some diversity in it. However, the diversity they had in it is typical 1970s Hollywood diversity. The black guy is there, but like he barely does anything and then he dies. The black woman just walks around and talks to a couple of little people and then somebody hits on her and that's about it. Then the person who's like the drag queen is like the killer, which is extremely problematic. So while there is diversity in it, yes, it wasn't always done great. Like, you know what I'm saying? And there was some like, harassment here and there. Like, when it comes to that of like the killer, Derek, he was not a trained actor. He had no idea what he was doing. To get in a reaction out of him, the director called him a bunch of homophobic slurs and everything. And that is extremely problematic. And he kept doing that to anger him and stuff. And the dude said he had no idea how to react to that because, he's never been in this environment before and stuff. But he got a reaction out of him. Like his character's supposed to be very angry. And you can legit tell that dude's pissed off, angry and stuff. Like really pissed off, angry. And you gotta imagine what he had to endure like during that time. He's like a fish out of water and getting treated like this. And he had no idea it was coming, you know what I'm saying? Because the director surprised him and everything by doing that. It's just such a low down thing. And then also with Jamie Lee Curtis, she was accused of being intersex during that time because men felt like she was too masculine looking, and that she had both genders down there and stuff. And it's just kind of like anybody who ever saw her in True Calling, I think that's what it's called. She is very female. Like, she's never done nudity, but she got a body on her. And well, she has that long slack jaw type face, but for some reason people assume that was masculine and everything. People back in the old days were garbage and how they treated people. Thank God Hollywood is trying to be a heck of a lot better and a heck of a lot more respectful. But then there are those who want to go and be all like, is that a transgender? Is that a transgender? I think that boxer's a transgender and everything. And it's just idiots like that. So times really have not changed, but they have gotten better than what they were before. Another famous person in this movie is David Copperfield. I can't believe they got him in this movie. Like, I remember they had like a magician in here. And I'm all like, wow, this magician person must have really, like, this actor must have really studied because they're really good. I'm all like, hey, I bet it's a real magician. I don't know what David Copperfield looked like. I might have seen his act one time, but I don't remember. My favorite magician is always the masked magician, but like, yeah, they actually got a real life magician to do the magic stuff in here. And it was so cool to watch because I love watching magic tricks and stuff. And I think this happened because the director or the producer really liked magic and really wanted to add it to his movie. Sadly, the remake just gets an actor to play the magician and don't really do no magic tricks. So that was a big letdown. So this movie is about like students at first, and they're at a party and they prank this one guy named Kenny. And so like Kenny is played by Derek. They prank him so bad thinking these two girls, Mitchie with an M, not a B, and Alana are going to, I guess, like make out with him or something like that. And so Alana's hiding in one room and the other girl's hiding there too. And there's like a fake body there, Daver. And so he goes in and he freaks out. And then like he stands up and he's spinning around. And while he's doing this, he's in his underwear. And as he's spinning around, he's getting caught. And like the drapes of like, you know, the bed, it's like one of those princess type beds with those with the fabric on top, kind of like a royal kind of thing. And he's just spinning around for some bizarre reason. And then they stop and they do the whole slow motion and the freeze frame thing. 80 slasher movies were notorious for this. I don't know, it's kind of like freezing something in time and capturing the moment, and it really sinks in your head, you know what I'm saying? They don't do that no more, and they did not freeze it for like the remake. So years later, these now like pre-med students and everything are about to board a train. It's New Year's and it's kind of like a costume Halloween thing. And so this is kind of interesting. The fact that they're on a train, they're in Halloween costumes, and nobody really knows who's who if you're wearing a mask. And so like the killer, of course, is gonna sneak aboard and everything, wearing a costume. And when they do, it's a terrifying mask. Like, I love that mask and everything. And so, but one thing this killer does is that they constantly changes costumes for some bizarre reason. And so this is just the entire premise of like the movie. Everybody's on board the train and like everybody's drinking and partying and talking and conversating and, you know, stuff like that. But then we get our first kill off screen. There's a person there, there's a sword sticking out from them. And the killer places this person on a train track so they can get ran over and stuff. And so the killer makes the way on board, like, you know, the train. Now, of course, the second person to die, like I said before, is the black dude in the lizard costume. And so we really don't get a sense of who these characters are. They have strange names. There's Doc, there's Pet, there's Mary, there's the student body president, some other people too who I can't think of right now. Oh, Mitchie and everything. And so, like, they're just doing typical people stuff. And it gets pretty boring. And then you get the magic act. And so, like, every once in a blue moon, somebody will die. Now, when the dude in, like, the lizard costume dies, the conductor, Carney, is the one who finds it, played by that Ben Johnson. And the conductor is a very odd man. He sees the body and he kind of just quietly closes the door and doesn't let nobody on the train knows what happened because he doesn't want to start an uproar and everything. And then at some point, he does eventually tell his colleagues and everything, but it takes a good while. Now, at first, you only really see two conductors on board. Later on, you see the entire staff. Makes sense, because who's taking care of the train and everything? We even get to see, like, the conductor, the driver dude. No, wait, the conductor dude's not Carney. Carney is there, but I think they call him something else. What don't people call, like, who be on, like, the train and take care of people? I forget their name. But anyway, the remake didn't do that. There's literally two people working that train. It's like, well, where the heck is everybody else? Anyway, so eventually he does tell some of the other people, and they're trying to figure out, what's kind of going on. But then they tell Alana, who is Jamie Lee Curtis. For whatever reason, they just confide in her that she's always in the movie, always talking, always getting dramatic and everything. And it's just kind of like, aren't you going to tell other people? So eventually they start to tell people because more people are dying. Mitchie died and stuff like that. So there's a mass panic and everything. And Carney, stops the train, makes everybody get out in the cold, letting everybody know, yo, take off your mask and everything. We're all going to be in one cart. There is a killer here. We're going to try to find this person. They're walking around with axes and stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, isn't there like a communication system on the train? Like there has to be, right? Maybe not. I gotta look that up because you would think there would be like a communication system and everything. There has to be because they had to figure out when the next stop is going to be so they can alert like the authorities and stuff like that and whatever. Now, one misdirect is, of course, the magician, because like he's this creepy, eerie guy. And he's kind of talking to some of the women and making some of the guys jealous. He makes Doc jealous and everything. And so, you get this long, like magic trick show and everything. And it's just kind of like, could he be the killer? There's something odd going on with him. But at some point in time, when Alana talked to Doc, she realizes something because, she's the final girl. She's supposed to be smart. And she tells Doc that, oh no, it must be Kenny and everything. Because like, he, the two people or the two people that died are two of the people who pranked him and everything. So we must be next. So Doc freaks out and he locks them in like a room, think, okay, we'll be safe. She leaves and everything. And he eventually will like die. And so they had looked into like a yearbook and they realized that Kenny was a magician and he liked doing stuff like that. So they figured that the magician must be like, the killer and stuff, right? Well, at some point in time, we see the magician with like a saw and we see his assistant come in. And so I'm all like, and at this point in time, we know that the killer might be female because of the fingernail polish and stuff. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's the assistant. So there's something unusual with the assistant when you look at her. She looks almost like she's in a faraway distance where you can't really see her face. She's very tall, and there's something constructed about her face that don't feel real and everything. I thought she might have been like a mannequin or something like that, or like an animatronic or just something like, what I'm saying? And so then, and this thing, what's his name, head starts rolling and everything. And then later on, they find the magician stuffed in the box and he's dead. And I'm thinking to myself, and hold up, the assistant was the only person in the room with him. So at some point in time, Alana, she was in this room by herself and she pretended to go to sleep, so she outwits the killer and stuff like that. And before they run, she hides in a cage. There's a great scene where she's in the cage and she has I think she might have, no, he has like this spear type thing. And slowly, one by one, he's taking out all the lights and everything. And you're like, oh my God, she's gonna get it. Eventually, she'll get that. They fight a little bit. And at one point, she's trying to talk to the conductor, but it's not the conductor, it's actually the killer, who reveals himself to be Kenny. He dressed in drag and then later takes that off, some prosthetics and some fake teeth and everything. And he's pissed. He's still pissed after all those years and talking about how he just wanted that kiss and everything. So there's a big scuffle. Eventually she'll get that. They fight a little bit. And then Carney comes in with a shovel and smacks him in the face over and over and over. And he falls out the train. And down below, about 100 feet into the freezing cold water, and smack dab really hard. I think on some pavement too, I think. And assuming he died. And so, if I would have been like in the 1970s, which I wasn't because I was not born then, I would have been just anticipating like, who the heck could this killer be? Probably assuming it might be Kenny, who got like picked on, because in the movie, Alana says that after what we did to him, he got placed in the hospital because he's sick in the head. Now, we never get to see him in the hospital, but the remake, they show this to improve on that. And one thing I never understood, these are supposed to be pre-med students, but they don't sound like they are. They don't talk about nothing medical or nothing. This was a huge ball that got dropped, but the remake makes up for it. And so, yeah, if I would have watched this back in the day, I would have been like, okay, I know who the killer is going to be. But you're still wondering because they give you all those misdirects. Even with Doc, there's a misdirect with him acting really odd and weird and stuff and overly aggressive. So while you assume it might be this one person, your mind starts to wonder if it could be somebody else. And I love that. And so, like, there's also, like I said, that nude scene with the topless scene, which don't make no sense whatsoever. But the remake improves on that more, you know what I'm saying? Because a lot of these characters have no real character development of any kind. You just, whatever personality they have, that's what you get. They're just a bunch of drunks and like party people, and you don't even get the sense of like, are they all truly really like that, or is it just a special occasion, or like what? This was the 1980s, it was very fast and very loose with like the writing. I've said that so many times before. It's very just in your face. And they don't really always want to explain like that much and stuff like that. And I really wish they would. Sadly, even the remake, because it's beat by beat, they don't try to improve on that. And what's odd is like the writers of like the remake, people I've praised before for a certain television show, a slasher television show, I'm surprised they didn't elevate that part of the script more. Like, I don't get it, but I'll talk more about that when I talk about that movie later on this month. And so I do get why this movie didn't make as much money at the box office. It's like, how many times are you going to have a movie, like a slasher movie, and there's no real character development? There's no real motive as to why characters do what they do. We know why he's doing what he's doing. So that's motive enough and you don't need it. But then, of course, there is the whole Kenny being like a drag queen. If so many years have passed and he's working with this magician, you have to audition to work with a magician. And since he had that background in magic and stuff like that, then most likely, and the magician had no idea Jimmy was like a woman. So then technically it wasn't a disguise. It's just Jimmy being a woman and stuff. And so that's never really explained. And so then I do now understand why the LGBT, since I now thought about that, I'm thinking, wait a minute, you have to audition to be like, a magician's assistant. So he's been living his life as a woman, but why exactly? So there is that nasty trope of like, in a slasher movie, they make like, the like person of the LGBT community into that of a slasher. They did it in Cherry Falls, they did it in Silence of the Lambs, they did it in Prom Night, another Jamie Lee Curtis movie, and now they did it in this movie and stuff. And it could just be because this was the old days. They want to let people know that, hey, they don't like people like that. And, like, in their minds, people like that are like, troubled and sick and vicious and stuff like that. So they want to show that in cinema. It's kind of like what's going on today with transgender people. You always talking about, oh, look at them. They out here committing these crimes and they do this and they do that and they grooming our kids and you hear crap like that today. So things like that are very problematic. Heck, even in the movie Valentine, although this one crossdresser was not the killer, he was perverted and always hitting on like his neighbor and stuff. Now, the remake, they do change things around. They don't have the killer being like a crossdresser or nothing like that. However, the killer might be part of the LGBT community. I'm not quite 100% sure. And there's a reason why I feel like that. And I'll explain that when I talk about that movie and stuff. So once again, they are problematic. And even though the remake is set in modern times, it does kind of feel like they're checking a little bit off a list here and there. And heck, they even still killed the person of color off, like the second person being killed twice. Instead of the black person, now it's the Asian person. And it's like they didn't learn the lesson because they're doing a beat by beat of the original, but just tweaking things here and there. Now, wasn't that spooky? All right, well, I shall talk to y'all later. Bye.